Well, good morning, Monday morning, the first big work day of the new year, it's 2026. That's a picture of me. The cell phone somehow embedded me taking a picture of the dance floor at the bunker in Washington, D.C. when it turned midnight on New Year's morning. And still there in the picture. Um, so today I want to talk about an idea that people are proposing, particularly in my circle. Could we live in a moneyless society? Could we live without a medium of exchange? And was any so I sort of made an outline. I wish I had an easel board in this a condo I have that's so cluttered with the stuff from the house. I don't have room for really make a studio. But if I had an easel board to draw to write these things down on a big mic and a big studio could make this um, look better. But the fact that we use money as a medium of exchange and we use it symbolically through credit cards and Google and Apple Pay and swipe, or swipe our phones to use the metro or the MTA in New York or in Philadelphia, all now the transit systems can be integrated right now, and we don't even have to just use your phone for that. It means we can sort of transact with a hyphen, with strangers without having, without having to have any other kind of connection to them socially or personally, or have any obligation to them. That they don't have to be connected to us in any other way. Their business is not our business normally. So it also enables us to have individual agencies, even before the internet, long before the internet, even when I was a young man in 1970, starting work, I had my own possessions, my own apartment, my own record collection, my own sort of way of having some influence, even in the old world before the internet. And when I miss being a young man again and having a lot more strength and everything. But it enables you to have, it enables you to have your agency as a person or as a parent or as a family unit. It also leads to talking about inheritance and not only probate or the legal structure of trust, but just the ethical issues of depending on inherited wealth, which is particularly an issue in my situation, but that's sort of a separate topic. Um, and the question is, could we have functioning societies without money as the basis for exchange or for transactions? And looking around a little bit, we've had them before. We've had the ancient Incas in Peru. Everything was what they call redistribution and reciprocity. They had a totally barter system and labor-based system, and they had quite an advanced civilization for or for centuries until was conquered by the Spanish, and before that, the Tiwanaku culture, Bolivia. I almost took a trip down there in 1974, and I wound up moving to New York instead. I never will probably be able to do that, but go and live and see if you could survive in a community at 13,500 feet elevation or something. El Alto or some of the highest communities in the world are down there. But anyway, um, other terms, the Yanomami tribes in the Amazon and the Kula Ring and Papua New Guinea and the Tibetan monasteries, all of the many different societies around the world, indigenous societies have had basically lived with exchanging work and time and don't really have currency. And then if you take a vow of poverty in the church, you basically live without money. the Tibetan monasteries are given an example. You think about the Bible and you think about Jesus overturning the money changers. Before I think that was before basically his march in Jerusalem, and then, of course, being taken to the cross. That was shortly before the crucifixion. And in fact, when Jesus was born, people had to walk and camel, I guess, to their places to be taxed back in the time of biblical times. I'm not sure how they really kept track of it then, but they did. Um, but there were people then, of course, who believed even then that you shouldn't depend on money. The story of Diogenes living in a jar, the idea of vows of poverty now in the church. Um, Now, but if you want to live, and there are people who today, particularly they're more on the right, who say they want to be more with people that are like them and take care of each other more than they did. And only then, after taking care of people that are like them, venture out into the rest of the world. And it was sort of like that when I was growing up, particularly on the mother's side of the family. We'd spend a good part of every summer in Ohio around Oberlin in Kipton, the small town of Kipton. And the it was an extended family. There was two sisters who hadn't married, had to share a bedroom in one room. My mother and I and father, when he was there, before he went away in business, would share the north bedroom. And then there was an uncle that lived nearby that was not then, and some of them eventually got married, but this was back in the 1950s. And watch Cleveland Indians baseball, go to Cleveland when the Senators were there. That was interesting. But that was summers when I was a boy, extended family. Um, but if you want, so we kind of did take care of each other more than, group of maybe 15 people, extended relatives. And in fact, when we would arrive there at the beginning of our visits in the summer, we'd have a great big dinner in the dining room the night. I always remember eating the molded salad. I love the molded salad. I remember that. And the house had a kind of a little passageway to the den. Besides going around through the living room, it was kind of like a secret passage. It was kind of an interesting house. But anyway, boyhood memories. But the surest way, if you want to live in a way that is less dependent on money now, the one possibility, of course, is to live um, an intentional community. And the one that I'm familiar with is the Twin Oaks community, which is in about 100 miles south of Washington. It's in it's in near Mineral, Virginia, and it's down this. I think this is the picture of it here on Google Maps right here. It's Mineral, Virginia. That's out 520, right? 522, which goes up to Culpeper. And I don't know if you can follow it on here. And then it's kind of hard. That's the Lake Alma and so forth. Here's 95 over there, but that shows it to you on a map where it is. A little bit north of Interstate 64, which takes you down to Richmond from Charlottesville. And I can actually show you some pictures. I may have shown you these before in the distant past. I may have shown you some of these pictures. I visited the place in April of 2012. Where they had a once a month Saturday afternoon tour. It was 3 hours. There's some pictures. There's a piano. And that was the tofu factory, I think, and that's the piano. You have to enlarge these pictures. And that was some of the housing, and I think that's the hammock factory. I think that might be the tofu factory, more of the tofu factory. The tofu that they sold, you can sometimes find it in grocery stores, and that's some of the property. And that's another typical residence. Now, everybody, everybody there had their own room. Um, Families had larger rooms, or maybe had two rooms. The single people didn't have rooms that had smaller space, so it was based on need. And they had sort of a time bank system for keeping track of your labor. You had to work 42 hours a week or something. And you did not exchange money within the property normally. But you did, if you could rent a car or leave the property. Um, and it had about 100 people there. There was another community nearby called Acorn. It was smaller. I'm not sure where it is now. It was about 10 miles from it. But I remember that the tour started at 1, and we went and sat in on their weekly meeting, or it was a Saturday afternoon. And when you went in there, it was like a living room, and a nice living room in an older house sort of thing, and in the country. And it felt like you had been there for years. It felt like you were walking in on another life that you could have left. It was a very strange feeling just to sit in one of their meetings and hear them talk about their issues with their work credits and how they did their jobs and everything. It was very kind of interesting to sit on that for 40 minutes before doing the rest of the tour. And they actually had a senior section for incapacitated people, and they had a library, and they had a game room, had games and recreation, but it was kind of a closed community. And they are very inclusive as to who can become a member. I think you have to try. You have to move there. You have to do a 3-week tour or trial period or something. You have to apply and do a 3-week trial period or something like that. But there are other communities around the country. There are a lot of them that have different rules. And some of them are, particularly in some of the red states and some of the more conservative states, a few of them are, as you're hearing about, are exclusive, and you have to be, of a certain religion, a certain race, and probably be very conservative as to and how you live sexually. You probably do for a few of these. And some of them might get challenged in court, but they're probably, because they're private property, they'll probably be allowed. Some people will probably want to move into them. I think there are a couple of them in Arkansas and a couple of them in Idaho, I think. And there'll be more of them in Missouri. There'll be more of them around the country. You'll probably start hearing about. Um, Generally, I was just talking about, all the way back, and I don't know if I mentioned that feudalism. This does sound like a world where common people live in without money and a property run by nobles, like feudalism. And back in the Middle Ages, people, were allowed to work on farm the land around a nobleman's castle, and they had to give some of their crop to the nobles. They had very limited use of money. Some of them had money, but this kind of desire could lead us backwards. I think that's true. Now, within generally within a larger society, you can have barter economies. You can have time banks, which the IRS has some rules for time banks. You can have what they call core economies or social economies, which are basically systems that depend a lot on voluntarism. People working in food banks, for example, or particularly those cooking. I think organizations like Food and Friends in the DC area, for the Arlington Food Bank, or some of those kind of fit in. People that volunteer for those fit into that idea. Um, you this idea of core economies could lead us toward the idea of social credit systems, which might become a. Some people say that could be an issue if we start developing digital IDs for age verification. That could be another risk of if they could be misused, for something for like installing something like that. Um, there's so much concern over not just equity among groups, which is the left, but on the right, there's so much concern over fitness, per individual fitness. Could you survive in huge disruption to our economy, like a electromagnetic pulse attack or something like? Could you recover from something like that? Are people fit to recover something like? People on the right worry more about that, about taking care of their own isolated areas, and so that's kind of a virtue. Um, but um, so, so whether if you're going to continue society though and have some sort of individual accountability, it does sound like we could be heading toward a social credit system someday as a compromise for having a sustainable system with individual accountability rather than group accountability of who is oppressor and who is oppressed, that kind of thing. Bring it down to the individual level. And it does sound like the social credit idea, which China is trying, it could sound more tempting. You could then your social credit score could almost be like a kind of money in a sense. It could be put on the blockchain, maybe. It could be permanent. It could become very dystopian. So those are my thoughts anyway on the idea of whether we could live without a money system or with much less dependence on it than we have now. I'll give you a few links in the description to read about it. Go to go to go to Tutors has a link, and then there's a Wikipedia article, and there's a good Medium essay on it. I'll give you the links for it. There are a lot of things online if you ask Copilot about it. But anyway, I've been hearing people, since I've been hearing some friends of mine talk about this more recently. I thought I would just address it in a video today. And I do thank you for listening.